Hello there, and a very warm welcome to episode 12 of the Tartan Daily, straight after episode 11. That was a quick turnaround, wasn't it? A lot quicker than the one from the last few days, where we had a poem sitting up for 2 days, and then we were back into this. But as you can see, I'm joined by another faceless individual, but this is a man who deliberately keeps his face off of things to maintain the anonymity of a superhero. That's your kind of vibe. It's Adam Miller, the man behind the absolutely brilliant Old Fun Facts football account. And let's be honest, mate, it's a whole thing now. You've got a podcast. You're obviously doing all the TV reviews for the national newspapers, all of that stuff. You've got lots going on. Tell us a bit about that first, because people, if they're new to your stuff, like I would advise them to engage with it. You're probably the person I retweet the most, and definitely like tweets the most, just because, look, genuinely on a daily basis, you're usually making me laugh, mate. So tell us about the whole smorgasbord of Old Fun Facts production that's going on right now.
It's hard to know where to start at the moment. It's been pretty relentless over the Euros. So I was like, I get woken up at 10-7 this morning to go on BBC Radio Kent and talk about Harry Kane, which is not. I
saw that. What, was it good? What did you? I mean, you must have posted something that caught their attention. Like,
I think it's just that you do enough. Like, I've done quite a bit of morning radio stuff for BBC, which 9 times out of 10 has been good, give or take the odd Kay Adams and Joan Burney threatening me with the water cannons filled with disinfectants. Apart from that, it's going well. So I think with these things, your number then gets passed to other radio stations. So I was on that, and they were talking. They said it was all very good this morning, but they talked about how let's turn our attention to the Wales game after what was a disappointing match on Friday night. And I was like, it wasn't disappointing for me.
No, good. That's it. That's just lazy, isn't it?
I found it very. No, he was just speaking from an English perspective. I was like, it was a lot of things for me, but not disappointing. But yeah, I mean, so I'm doing stuff like that. But I've got technically I'm a journalist, so that's a lot of things going on. I'm writing TV watch columns for the Record on most days. So that'll be like, just talking about what Lineker's saying in the studio and then what the pundits are saying at the game.
We'll do a bit of that today, mate, because the thing is, I've missed some of the TV coverage because I've been in various different places. So I've had to watch it in various different ways, So I'm really interested to hear your views on that.
Mm-hmm. And I've got that. I've got the weekly podcast, the Old Fun Facts podcast. And so that takes up a lot of time, sort of writing and researching and editing and promoting and all the rest of it. And
you can tell the amount so in total contrast to this, which I have made no bones about, it's a total ad hoc, let's just bang out a daily podcast for the Euros. Yours is meticulously crafted, and I've got a lot of respect for that, man.
It's probably more meticulous than I've probably bit off more than I can chew, just in terms of how long it takes to do that, because you're going, a lot of it is when you're recording, a lot of it's spontaneous, and a lot of it's reacting to what the guests are saying, everything like that. But I try to, basically the way I looked at it was, who knows how long I'll be able to do it for, who knows if it'll be a success or not. So I want to be able to,
but it's been rampantly successful, man. Like, it's well.
Yeah, it's been better than I could have hoped for, which has been brilliant. But I kind of took the attitude that treat every episode as if it's the last one you get a chance to do, so you don't want to look back on it and go, I kind of wish I'd done it this way. So there's a podcast, and I've been doing a few monologues, writing and recording for the BBC over the Euros. So we had one scheduled to do on Saturday morning, and we just, because that was the only time we could do it Saturday morning, we just had to sort of take a guess at what the England score would be, the score in the England game. So I was like, well, let's just do the Scottish thing and be sort of pessimistic and write one for, we're looking at the Croatia game as just a chance to salvage some pride. And then obviously that's not what happened. So it was like a frantic rewrite up until midnight, so it could then get signed off by someone in time for us to record on Saturday morning. So it's been pretty insane. But it's better to have too much work than not enough.
No, absolutely that, mate, and especially these bits of work that we create for ourselves, as journal types, where it's the stuff we don't get paid for, but is our own sort of personal baby, you know. And do you know the way I would describe your pod? Like, I mean, I would be lying if I said I've listened to every episode, but I've dipped in and out. The problem is, see, when you start sort of doing all your own stuff, your time to listen to other people's just completely diminishes, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's the main reason. But the bits that I've heard, I would kind of describe it as kind of as a kind of have I got news for you sort of, not in terms of like the editorial viewpoint it takes or anything like that, but just in terms of the way that there's nice wee set pieces set up for the humour, you know.
Yeah, I mean there are jokes
really
about Tories as well.
Well, exactly, which is to be honest, a staple for any self-respecting podcaster these days. And you're getting our old pal Gaby on to talk about Taylor Swift. I've got all the time in the world for that.
Yeah, Gaby was great on the show. To be honest, I'm not really. Don't get me wrong. If a high-profile footballer got in touch and said, "I'd love to come on your podcast," I would have them on, obviously. But I'm not really in the market for guys that are currently playing. I'm more interested in interesting people who happen to be fans of football, so that the kind of maybe the first half of the show, or even the first kind of third, is taken up with, with talking about what's happened recently in football, and there's a guarantee that the people who are on it will be able to talk kind of coherently and articulately and hopefully in an entertaining way about it. But then the rest of the show tends to just be about what their backgrounds are, what their interests are, and the things that they're passionate about that might be related to football or might have nothing to do with it. And my hope, and from the feedback I'm getting, it seems to be what's happening, is that people are maybe coming into it for a football thing, and then they're finding themselves getting interested in topics that they might not necessarily have otherwise been.
See, I like that. It's your proper came for the Fitbit, straight for the Glasgow banter kind of vibe. But I've got a lot of time for that. Glasgow and anywhere else in Scotland or the United Kingdom or the greater podcasting sphere of the world, I might add. Thank you to everyone that's sort of watching the stream at the moment, and anyone that listens subsequently to the podcast when it goes down the podcast tubes. If you do have any thoughts or want to share anything, you can find Adams, as my banner said, at Old Fun Facts 1 on Twitter. You'll probably repeat that at the end. And likewise, anyone who enjoys this today, feel free to subscribe to my platforms, my YouTube channel, and you can find the Tartan Daily and all your podcast players. But that's the end of the plugs. Let's get into the nitty gritty of things, mate. What has been your single favourite moment of the Euros so far? Now, I'm not talking necessarily football-wise. I'm just talking your favourite thing that you've seen. I think mine is the Scotland fans singing "You're Just a Bleep" Rabbie Burns to the William Shakespeare statue, and the guy who belly slid across, like it was like tarmac or paving anyway, and he's just belly sliding along that into a massive puddle. I think that was my favourite two moments of all the great sort of plethora of social media stuff so far. What about you, mate? Because you're even more engaged in that side of things than me.
Well, you've stolen my Rabbie Burns answer. That's the one I had lined up. But no, I think possibly because I'm so tied up with watching the commentators and the pundits and all that side of it, I think seeing the reaction from Lineker and Rio Ferdinand and guys like that, very, very, very good professional broadcasters who had maybe get slightly ahead of themselves before the Scotland-England game. And then again, I think from a Scottish perspective, Souness at Wembley. So I have to, with these TV watch columns, I have to file them by 10 o'clock on the dot, and it was like a couple of minutes after that
how do you watch the line of the night? Like, how do you watch the BBC and ITV coverage concurrently? How do you do that?
Well, most of the games up until this point have just been on one channel. There's up until yesterday or the day before, games haven't been clashing with each other. Generally, it's been, there's been a game at 2, a game at 5, and a game at 8, and ITV's got one, BBC's got the other, or whatever. But with the game on Friday night, like I'm a big fan of Rory Hamilton as a commentator, but
he was on episode 1 of this actually.
Yeah, Rory's brilliant, and he was doing the commentary for STV. And if I had just been watching it as a fan, I would have stuck with STV, but because I had the column to do, ITV had Souness, Keane, McCoist. You're obviously going to get more content for the column on that. So I was watching there, and then a couple of minutes after my column was submitted, Souness comes out with something like "Ain't no chance it's coming home" on that display, on the basis of that display. And it felt, as I said in my column yesterday, it felt a bit like a kind of modern equivalent of him planting that Galatasaray flag in the centre circle.
Aye, no, he does love a bit of the bleep housery, mate. I'm no swearing because of the time of day that it is, but if you watch my poem that I did after we beat England, it's very, very sweary. But it's only 2.5 minutes of your life, so anyone watching this that's not watched that yet, hopefully you enjoy that wee bit of content. Part of the reason for that was, obviously, it was a bit of a rough night the night before, and internet was playing up, as it always seems to do in whatever hotel chain I seem to stay in. But do you know what's been great, mate? See, coming down here, it's changed London as a place. I said that in the previous episode that I just did. London is a completely different animal when it's filled with Scottish people just being Scottish. And it's been a delight just to watch the difference and it's actually changed, like the natives, if you like, or people that stay in London. Like, they seem to have responded to it, and positively, because I'll admit, before it all kind of happened, like with Scotland coming down, and obviously the fact as well that the London Mayor did not set up like a fan zone or anything like that, which I don't know if that's contributed positively or negatively to the point I'm about to make, but I think it's been great to see the way that people have responded positively. Another clip that I saw was where there was a guy with like a kind of bleach blonde head, and Scotland fans started chanting gas at him, and he just lay in the ground, and they went and poured beer in his mouth. Absolutely brilliant. Like, it's cracking to have seen like, that sort of coming together, and I think the line between kind of banter and all the rest of it it's just been bang on. Like, there's been enough sort of niggle that there's been good fun and good humour, but it's not been enough that it's gone over the line and we've seen masses of trouble, No. And I think that's testament to both fan bases, to be honest with you.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think we're in a different time. I mean, obviously there's still some very horrible elements within certain fan bases, as you can see around the discussion around taking the knee. But in general, I don't think a Scotland-England game is necessarily characterised by the same degree of tension off the pitch as it might have been a couple of decades ago. There's still that element, but to a much smaller degree. And I think it's general. I think a lot of it as well is just the sort of relief that obviously we're still some way from completely being back to normality, but just at the idea that some people can actually even attend these games. I think people are going down there in a more optimistic frame of mind.
Do you think it's maybe fostered, like the whole pandemic thing's kind of fostered a kind of an understanding between people that we should just generally be maybe a wee bit nicer to each other, and a bit more perspective about what's important?
I'd like to say that. As someone who spends a lot of their time on Twitter, I see a lot of evidence to the contrary. But I think in these kind of environments at football matches, I think certainly in the short term, I think and hope that a lot of it is just people are just going to be happy to, actually be back and enjoying it. And you still, obviously, you want sort of intense rivalry, but you don't want that spilling over. And hopefully we're past the stage of it spilling over on a large scale.
That's what I'm hoping as well. And I think you're right about the fans in the stadium as well, because there's been, had they been sort of empty arenas, and I've covered loads of games behind closed doors, and it's just not the same animal. Even a small percentage of the capacity being filled, got a crowd there. You know what I mean? It's not a capacity crowd, but it's there. And you just had to see the gusto with which the anthem was sung at Hampden against the Czechs. That, I mean, Fitba's back a bit, you know what I mean? Like, properly, because that was the great Jock Stein that said football without fans is nothing. And it wasn't quite nothing, because obviously the amount of money in the game today and various other things. But I mean, there was something there, but I must admit there was very few football matches that I was watching for pleasure when it was the empty arenas, because it just didn't appeal to me, mate. Like, there was something missing. There was something missing for the cut and thrust of the game as well, you know, like in terms of the way the players responded, because obviously the crowd can have an effect, and a home crowd can have a positive or a negative effect, you know.
Absolutely.
I think the Croatia game is going to be fascinating now. Obviously, with the bad news just come out when I was doing the previous stream there about Billy Gilmour. How big a blow do you think that is?
That's a massive blow. I think with Billy Gilmour as well, it's not just what he offers on the pitch. It was that he had been the shining light from the game the other night, and around him there was developing this enthusiasm that it's not just a case of a sort of seasoned pro coming in and having a good game. This felt like a moment that people would talk about. Although, Scotland didn't win the game, it felt like there'd been so much hype around this guy, and he more than delivered on it. And it felt like this would be a game, when Billy Gilmour is in his late 20s and has accumulated trophies and success at wherever he goes, you'd look back and go, I remember that game against England. That was the game he proved it. That was the game you knew he was the real deal. And so for him to be out of the squad, and hopefully they're saying that there weren't any other close contacts. Hopefully that
seems to be the report right now. Yeah,
hopefully that's the case. But even just losing that one player, it just feels massively deflating, given the sense of optimism that there was and has been since the game on Friday.
Let's talk a bit about what you just mentioned there. Now, tell me if you think this turn of phrase is fair. Is it fair to say there's a wee bit of a cult of Billy Gilmour that's built up? Particularly on social media, I'm thinking, because, as I say, you're tuned into that zeitgeist a lot more than me. I see so many posts about him, and I'm so glad I did episode 3 of this, by the way, which is all about him speaking to a coach that dealt with him when he was younger. So after this, feel free to check that out, anybody. But do you think there's a bit of a cult around that young man? And if so, is that a positive thing?
I don't know if cult's the word, because I've got an instant distrust of any cults. But I think
KKK.
Moving on. I think with Billy Gilmour, I think he is clearly a big talent, and not just in that way that we like to hype up our young players. He's a guy who's shown in the small glimpses that he's had at Chelsea. I think the first 2 games he had at Chelsea, he got consecutive Man of the Match awards, I think. There's been, there was a big, there was a lot of impetus behind the campaign for him to be playing in the Czech Republic match, and then a lot of disappointment when he wasn't given that opportunity. And I think the appeals for him to be playing were vindicated by his performance the other night. I don't think it's just people wanting to throw caution to the wind. I think there's a lot of data, a lot of evidence behind this idea that we wanted Gilmour to play. It wasn't just, let's throw him in untested. It was, this guy's already proved that he's capable of doing it. And he will add something to the team. And he didn't just add something to the team. He held his own and really dominated that game on Friday night.
Alan Risk says no less than the cult of Ryan Gauld. I think that's partly because Ryan Gauld has obviously not made the short list for the squad. But see, when you consider all these players that are kicking about, Adam, there's got to be a real positivity about it. And this is a scary place to be as a Scotland fan, right? I'm really positive about the future of our team. I look at that squad, it's mainly younger players, and other than maybe a natural goal scorer, a natural young goal scorer, and an heir to the throne in terms of the goalkeeping, I think we can be really positive about where the team's headed, not just now, but for the next 5-6 years. I think there's a backbone there that we can have, that we can really build upon.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of the squad, there are players in there, and everyone has been making the point for months now that we're not just there to make up the numbers, because there's several players in there who are already playing at a high level. And I had Craig Brown on the podcast a couple of weeks back, and he was saying, there's guys in there that, compared to Scotland teams of maybe 10 years ago, we're not reduced to pulling players from kind of slightly lower level in England. We've got a guy in there that's won the Champions League and the Premier League.
We've actually got two, which that was an interesting thing. I was on joe.co.uk in one of their shows, and the guy next to me pointed out that it was two Champions League players on the pitch, and they were both playing for Scotland, which was that took me aback when he said that.
Yeah, I mean, I think Andy Robertson's contribution to winning the Champions League is slightly greater than Billy Gilmour's, as much as I'd like to give Billy
Still got the medal.
credit. Still got the medal. But that's the calibre we've got. Kieran Tierney isn't just a squad player at Arsenal. He's one of their best players and possibly their most popular player at the moment. We've got several players operating at a high level, and a lot of them are young players as well. So there is the foundation there for not just saying, well, we've made it this year, let's pat ourselves on the back and wait another 22, 23 years to qualify for a tournament. This could be the foundation for something else. And if we're still going to Qatar and not doing the moral thing and boycotting it, as every country should be doing, then we've got a chance of doing well there.
This is what I like about you, mate. You're never scared to say it as it is, and mate, I'm of the same mind. I mean, the fact they got that World Cup was a travesty. I mean, even England's bid was the best bid, but Zinedine Zidane appeared in one video, and let's pretend that the bidding process was wholly transparent and above board.
I mean, obviously I've got my camera off, but you can imagine the inverted comma fingers.
Aye, no, exactly. I'm just. I don't want to go down that particular rabbit hole. I want to stick a bit with the kind of stuff you've been doing. So I'm really interested in hearing a bit more about the coverage. Now, what I would say is I've only dipped into wee bits of it. I've obviously seen the clip of Rio Ferdinand. I've seen the clip of Graham Souness. And I saw a bit of Ian Wright, who I must say is one of the pundits that aggravates me the most, because I don't think he offers much in terms of tactical analysis of the game. I think he's there as like this character without very much character. And I can remember him reacting. I think it was when Healy scored the goal, when Northern Ireland beat England 1-0, and they'd gone into that game bombastic, like, oh yeah, it's going to be easy, blah, blah, like even worse than they were going into this Scotland game. And David Healy gets the goal, Northern Ireland win 1-0. And the only way I can describe Ian Wright's performance after that was like a petulant toddler. It was ridiculous, like the way he went on after that game. He actually looked measured in his reaction compared to the folk on the other side after the game, I thought. But what's your general take on the pundits? And just in terms of their sort of performance in this, there's a certain sketch on the show Chewing the Fat where folk go around and it's a good guy and a something else, which we'll say a twerp, right? Because obviously it's 11 o'clock in the morning, don't want to be swearing. But in terms of twerp or good guy, how did the ratio of that go with regards to each of the pundits?
I'll start by sticking up for Ian Wright, right? Because Ian Wright was someone, I'd never considered him one of the sort of greatest pundits, and I still think there are pundits out there that offer more insight than Ian Wright necessarily does. But if you ever need something to change someone's mind on something, listen to the Desert Island Discs episode with Ian Wright. That was a moment for me where I'd never really thought that deeply about Ian Wright, and the guy just like it is the classic example of listening to a footballer when you don't have to have any interest in football to appreciate what they're talking about. He talked about on this show a moment where I think it was like I can't remember if it was like a teacher that he had when he was young, and it might have been a teacher or a coach when he was young, but I think it was a teacher. And he talked about this guy, and he was crying talking about the guy. This guy had basically been like a father figure for him, and they'd reunited on camera maybe like 10 years ago. The guy had shown up while Ian Wright was filming a documentary, and it was it was you can't keep yourself together listening to it. It was brilliant. And since then,
I must say I've not come across that, and I've not come across to something where he's inspired emotion in me like that.
Well, it's well worth a listen. And since then, I've been an Ian Wright convert. But I think generally the standard of in studio. This is the thing. I've had to be like, I've had to listen to every word of punditry and commentary basically to be doing these columns. And
okay, be you, mate.
I know. This is the bed I've made for myself. But I generally, the in-studio stuff has been of a pretty high standard. It's a bit more hit and miss with the guys on co-commentary. So there are some... Well, yeah, there are some guys on there who, I mean, in the spirit of Mark Lawrenson, who's no longer who's not at this tournament, there are guys in there who make it sound like a chore to be paid well to talk about exciting football matches. And what I would say to them is, firstly, well, I would have done it for less money, but secondly, you listen to someone like McCoist and say, well, how can McCoist be this excited about doing it and you make it sound so laborious? So it's, there are people out there who will probably give you better tactical insights than Ali McCoist does. But I, as a viewer, want to be sweat. The same way that if you're listening to a podcast, right, and you might not necessarily know or even care that much about the topic, but if there's an atmosphere in the studio where everyone's relaxed and getting on with each other, that transmits and you end up having a better time and you're more likely to stick with it. If I'm listening to McCoist talking about it and, he's that enthusiastic that everything is not just making the point, it's then saying, it really is, or let me tell you. And it transmits, that enthusiasm.
It's joy.
It's joy, yeah. And he's basically saying, well, I'm being paid to talk about football. How could life get any better? Whereas for certain other individuals, and you sort of half mentioned one of them there, it feels like, oh God, I've got to go and talk about Kylian Mbappe again. God, could life get any worse? Well, life could get considerably worse, mate, actually. In terms of the in-studio stuff, most of them have been good. I think Lineker seems a bit on autopilot these days.
It's ever since he said about, which some are really rate, by the way, is the fact that he's not doing the Champions League stuff so as he can go and watch Leicester and Europe with his lads. Fair enough. I think that's brilliant. Yeah. Good on him for knocking back the money and putting life before career, because I think a lot of us could sometimes benefit if you're doing that. But you're right, it's not, and I really rate him as an anchor, by the way, but I just don't think he's been at his best either.
Yeah, well, Lineker has been at the top of that game for, he's been doing it for 25 odd years, and there's no better anchor in the business at doing that kind of thing, and he's always professional and everything, and he did very well. Without going into a rant about the TV coverage, he did very well when they eventually handed back to him in the studio following the Cristian Eriksen collapse. But I think there are times, so for instance, there was a game the other day where Alex Scott was in the studio, and Alex Scott is one of my favourite pundits at the tournament. It's fantastic.
Knocks spots off everybody else in that BBC mob that they've got, I think, personally.
Well, but I mean, the BBC's coverage is, I think most of the BBC's pundits are great, with the odd exception. But she was there with Alan Shearer, and I can't remember who else was in the studio with them, but Lineker was allowing Shearer to talk at length, and twice I saw, but there were people on social media saying it happened, I think more than that, where Alex Scott was talking and he's just blatantly talking over her. And
it's Lineker or Shearer?
Lineker was blatantly talking over Alex Scott, and I'm thinking, I'm sure he's not doing that deliberately, but it's not. It didn't come off well, and Alex Scott is the one person in that studio who I would most like to hear, and so there are some pundits who are better than others. I think Souness has been, even without that jibe, I think there's something about Souness where he's got to the stage in his life where he's just relaxed. He's very, very good at this. And he does offer insight as well. And there are certain pundits as well who I actually liked for the Czech Republic game. I thought Darren Fletcher was very good. I thought he had a good... for it, when there was a lot of criticism, and probably justified, of Stephen O'Donnell at various points, which, you know, brilliantly and good on him, he's responded to in the perfect manner.
Amazing.
But he was talking, Dan Fletcher was talking, what I look for, because I'm not, and you'll never see it in the things that I write or in the podcast, I'm the first to admit tactics and all that side of it, that's not my strong point, and it's not, I'm only interested in tactics if someone can illuminate it for me, like make a good story from it, or make a good case using tactics. I'm not interested in the kind of dry data. I'm looking for someone to say, well, this is what it means, and give me a kind of illuminating, captivating story from that. And Dan Fletcher was really good, I thought, talking about how people were blaming Stephen O'Donnell for the first goal, for not closing that down. And he was talking about how O'Donnell he sympathised with him because O'Donnell would have been caught in two minds at that point, because he would have had a man marking role that he needed to follow there. So in his head, he's got to make a split decision, like, do I stick with my man, or do I leave my man and try and close this cross down? And he was probably kind of caught in two minds there, which, you know, still you would say, well, he should have settled on one and done one of those two things. But Dan Fletcher's like, you can't be too.
What he's doing is he's illustrating that, isn't he?
Yeah.
What he's doing for your average kind of Joe Blogs viewer.
Yeah, and that's what you want from
a bit of added value, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that's what you want, and there's not that many pundits who can do that as well as he did, as well as I thought he did it there. But there are plenty of good pundits there, and just I think my main gripe is with certain co-commentators who just make it sound like they're, you know, like it's a chore when really it should be a privilege.
Oh, it is a privilege. What do you think, James Mcfadden, in that regard? And then after this, I'm going to give you my opinion, see what you think.
I think James Mcfadden is never going to be the most enthusiastic sounding pundit, but he does talk a very good game. And when
he's also James Mcfadden, by the way, I should say. Like,
sorry,
so he's also James Mcfadden.
Well,
so
James Mcfadden, he gets a lot of water. Yeah. That wasn't a loaded cough, by the way. I was nearly choking on my water. Geez, not to constantly go, well, I spoke to this guy on my podcast. When Stuart Cosgrove was on a few weeks ago, he was talking about how at the recent Scottish Cup final, he had an opportunity to talk to James Mcfadden off air, just they were chatting away about the game, and he said it's brilliant having those moments with players who can really tell you. So he was talking about a chance that I think Christopher Kane missed for St Johnstone in the final, and he was telling Stuart what he thought should have happened in that moment. And that is what James McFadden's good at as a pundit, I think, is being able to illuminate that kind of thing for people who wouldn't necessarily be able to put themselves in the shoes of a striker with a chance at goal. He's, I think, very good at that. And he was on the other day when Lineker and Shearer and Alex Scott were picking over the bones of the Scotland-England game. And he was, although, as I said, he's not necessarily in his tone the most enthusiastic, he was probably the most enthusiastic that day when it came to talking about the England-Scotland game, because they weren't particularly upbeat about it.
Yeah. I think that's the thing. The one thing I would say is James McFadden can do no wrong. I think his insight into the game is well balanced with that desire of being a Scotland fan. And almost since he's retired, I think it was a kind of given thing that although he had some great performances at club level for his various teams, he always saved his biggest moments for a Scotland jersey. And I've almost got I feel I've got a more innate understanding of that bit of his psyche now that I've seen him do the kind of punditry bit, because it's just the level of investment he's got in it is there, but he doesn't get carried away with the passion in a sort of negative way. Like, so he doesn't get too despondent or anything like that. He just communicates it quite well. In terms of the other pundits, I'd actually like to disagree a wee bit in your assessment of, because I think ITV's offering has been a good couple of rungs above the Beeb. I think the standard of pundits they've got on has been, probably Alex Scott aside, a good bit better. I think in terms of anchoring, I've always liked Mark Pugach. I think he's really, really good. He was great in the radio back in the day. And it's kind of nice. Obviously, with the given what we do for a living, with the plethora of ex-pros that are involved in getting these kind of high-profile jobs, it's really nice to see someone who's just like a sort of earned these stripes presenter, journal, go on and have that kind of success. And I think he's a fantastic anchor, asks really, really incisive questions and really wrings the best out of a proper glittering panel that he's got beside him. Because Roy Keane, although he's somewhat become a parody of himself in recent years, he's still fantastic value and totally just says it as he believes it is, you know. Soonest as you say, barring the occasional sort of long monologue, which is ties right into Jonathan Watson's whole "can I just say something here" kind of vibe. That I think has been brilliant. And Gary Neville, I think, is the best pundit going and always delivers good value in terms of what he's doing. So I just think their offering has been a bit better than the Beebs. And I think that was illustrated most for me in the England-Croatia game, where they had their guys in the studio, and then Alex Scott was just doing a wee bit beside the pitch, you know, the short bit, and in about a 30 to 45 second segment, she delivered a better tactical analysis of the game than your team in the studio had done over the course of a good number of minutes, you know. And I think just that balance was kind of wrong. You mentioned the Cristian Eriksen thing. I think when he needs to step up and he's no just phoning in a wee bit, I think Lineker's brilliant, and his tone with that was perfect. Although obviously they should have cut away long before they did, which was and that was such a difficult thing to watch, Adam. Like I couldn't believe it. Like me and my mum was crying, and I was close, you know, like because it looked like the worst was going to happen for a wee while. So,
well, I think with the Cristian Eriksen thing, we talked about this on the podcast again, just on last week's episode. I think there were a lot of things that can be learnt from that. I think the problem, and I was like a lot of people, my initial emotional reaction to the TV coverage, and I obviously still stand by this, we should never have seen the compressions, we should never have seen the wife being consoled. None of that should have, that should not have been seen on television. But my initial reaction was, not heads must roll, but the who's to blame for this? That was my initial thought. Why was that shown? But the more I thought about it over a few days, I was thinking about the scale of it. Like, obviously, that's not BBC footage. We should say that for a start. It's not the BBC filming that, right? And a lot of people weren't able to see beyond that. Well, it's got a BBC logo in the top left hand, so it's therefore BBC. But even withstanding, obviously, minutes before they went back to the studio, the BBC should have cut away, and we shouldn't have been seeing those scenes. We should have either been in the studio, or we should have been seeing a test card, or we should have been seeing a blank screen. And if any of those things had happened, there would have been zero complaints. Everyone would have completely understood why. But I think, far from my initial reaction, which was someone should have just pressed a button, it's obviously far more complicated than that. And I'm pretty certain, without being an expert on these things and without presuming to have any insider knowledge, because I don't, I would think that everyone working at the BBC on a moral level would have instantly known we shouldn't be showing this. But the problem with an organisation of that scale is it's a case of, how do we get it signed off? Because a junior person presumably can't just go, I'm going to hit that red button now. You know, it's someone has to get it signed off by someone senior, and there has to be a UEFA protocol that's followed. So I think that what's happened there is a communication issue, an organisational issue, certainly not a voyeuristic thing. But I also think that the mistake that was made is in not having protocol agreed after the Fabrice Muamba thing. So that was 9 years ago. I think that in that time, there should be protocol, not just an organisational thing within the BBC, but an agreed thing with all TV stations, with UEFA, with FIFA, with English Premier League, with Scottish Premiership, with all levels of the game. There should be, if a game is being televised and something like this happens, here are the steps you must follow. And so we're not in a position where some young person at the BBC in a relatively low level of responsibility is going, why can't we get this off the screen now? And then are having to wait for someone to go, well, I need to check it with UEFA, or I need to check it with a supervisor or whatever. Because someone like me, if I'm in there, I'm going, oh, we've got to turn it off. But I'm thinking, is someone going to sack me for doing this without getting permission? And so also as well, I'm sure that from having spoken to someone who knows more about these things than I do, he suggested, well, the studio for a start wouldn't have been prepared for this to happen. The pundits might not have even been in the room at the time. So what they should have done is the test card or the blank screen. And everyone would have understood if a continuity announcer had then at that point said, unfortunately, we're unable to continue with our live feed just now. The program will resume shortly, or something like that. And again,
anything to kind of cover it. Now, I've actually run out. I mean, I know everyone always sort of wonders the various kind of hats I've worn in my sort of journalism and media career. One of them is an outside venue broadcast manager, or venue outside broadcast manager. Sorry. So that's basically being in charge of the broadcast, right? So I've done that role, and what I would say is, even at an organisation like the BBC, it's a core team that is pretty small, that is responsible for most of what's happening in that broadcast, because the nature of the beast is you can only have so many people doing so many things. So most of them are run from one truck. Now, I don't know if that's the case at a major event, because I've never worked at a major event. I've only really done sort of your standard kind of football match. I imagine it's a bit bigger. But I think one of the key things that you say there is with regards to, in an organisation like the BBC, with something as high profile as this, is like who signs off on like that. But that's the point where you say the match director or whoever's in charge of that broadcast ultimately. So the match director should suggest it to the person in the kind of broadcast management role, and that person should be readily available to then go, do you know what, let's do the morally right thing and do it in a timely fashion. That said, I don't think we're going to be in this situation again, because I think there will be a protocol agreed with every, and again, another thing to add into the mix is, if you are the person in charge at the BBC at that point and you pull away while the rest of the world doesn't, then I mean that's kind of going out on a limb. It might be something that annoys not in this particular situation, but you're basically, you might be going against regulations that you've agreed with UEFA, So there are a whole myriad of things to consider. But what I do know from my friends that work abroad is that different countries did it different ways. Spain stayed on the feed long after England did. Germany cut the feed, usually efficient Germans, they cut the feed very early doors, So I think it's one of those things where there's a lot of lessons to be learnt from it. But I mean, the one thing that goes above anything, he's now been discharged from hospital, I believe. Thank goodness for that. And having defibrillators beside a football park, that is like, I mean, it should be a park in the land,
Well, the thing is, there is in no way that you would. There's no way to say that you're glad it happened. It was a horrible thing, but there are positives that can be taken from it. It is, for even just viewers like us, it was harrowing to see. For his teammates, it's unimaginable. For his family, it's even worse. And for the player himself, God knows how traumatic it will be to look back on that. But there are positives that will come of it, and the biggest positive I think that's going to come from it is the increased awareness of CPR. I think I'll be interested to see over the next few weeks what the uptake is in terms of CPR classes. I think that is now an issue that is at the forefront of people's minds. There might have just been something that they were sort of dimly aware of, whether it be learning techniques or just, as you alluded to, having defibrillators at stadiums now. Because I know there are defibrillators at some, but I don't know how widely or at what level that stops being
Yeah,
commonplace.
I'm not entirely sure about that, mate. But I think like even at like your standard sort of park where folk go and play now, like kids and stuff. So I mean, the Power League springs to mind. That's obviously a brand, but any of these places where you can just go and have a kick about with your mates, I think there's
Other
got to be
powerful leagues are available.
Aye, it needs to be, because it can save lives. CPR as well, as Simon Scher, knowing what to do in that situation could have been absolutely vital. I know some papers sort of ran with that as the reason his life was saved. And just last thing I want to mention on it is just that sort of guard, the protective guard that the Denmark team formed around him was that properly nearly had me greeting, man. And the bit where I think it must have been Cristian Eriksen's missus or a family member, and getting comforted by Simon Scher and Kasper Schmeichel. It was really moving. And regardless of who goes and wins this tournament, Denmark have kind of won the tournament as well with that moment, like the way that they responded. And it just showed, particularly in a time where nowadays footballers are elevated to these kind of superhuman sort of statuses, particularly in the big league down south, that's the best league in the world, trademark, and elsewhere. It was just the human side completely came to the fore, and it was just I'm so glad. Obviously, Cristian Eriksen's well-being is the first thought, but it's thank goodness for the tournament somewhat as well, because I mean, if anything had gone any worse, even if he'd sort of been sort of ill over a long period, it would have cast a shadow over the whole thing, you know.
Well, I think we not learned from that, but we obviously got a reminder from that football is relatively insignificant. And it's obviously it's just the cliche to end all cliches to say it puts things into perspective, but there's not really another way to look at it. I don't think the tournament would have mattered at all if the outcome had been worse. And, you know, that feeds into as well that UEFA have big questions to answer around the fact that Denmark ended up playing that game 2 hours later, however long the gap was. And for it to be dressed up as Denmark chose to play it, it wasn't a case of them choosing to play it. They were, by all accounts, given 2 options, you know, play it tonight or play it at lunchtime tomorrow. And they were like, well, we're not going to be sleeping tonight, so we're going to feel even worse tomorrow. So I think it was UEFA have got a lot to explain in that regard. You know, when there could have easily been the option of just calling it a draw. The game was a draw at that point in the match anyway.
My kind of thing on it is, I mean, I don't actually know what the ruling would have been. I assume that a 3-0 forfeit would have been the punishment, you would call it, meted out.
Yeah, I mean that is a punishment, you know,
which is shocking. And I imagine there's going to be a whole raft of things put in place for the sporting integrity kind of thing, and obviously the health and safety, which is the primary thing, and then guidelines for the TV studios. But that's what I love about these podcasts, mate, is like sometimes you can go down an unexpected road, and to dive that deep into the Eriksen thing, I'm glad we did, because it deserved some airing on this podcast without any shadow of a doubt. But to bring things back to sort of Scotland things, we've got a question in from Henry Turner, who's very nice about me. Henry's used to play in our 6-a-side team at university. Henry was a flying winger in that team. But he says he would love to know opinions on Mctominy. He was at school in Lancaster with him. Then he's got a wee beer emoji in the spirit of things, which is good. Henry's a good Celtic man and also a Scotland fan. So despite sort of growing up in Lancaster, so he's a good lad. But aye, Scott Mctominy, obviously Henry's known him since he was away. What's your opinion on him as a Scotland player, Adam?
I've been very impressed with him. I think as well, he's another example of the type of player, you know, talking about earlier. We're no longer recruiting from the lower, not necessarily League 2 level, but not in the past, not necessarily Premiership level. We're now recruiting a guy from Manchester United, from Arsenal, from Chelsea, wherever, from Liverpool. Mctominy is a guy who's not going to be overawed by playing in a major tournament, you know, the level that he's playing at week in, week out. And he's shown adaptability to play in a different position for Scotland. He's not a guy that you have worries about going into these games. And yeah, I think
he's better as a centre back for Scotland, because I actually do. I think the way we play, it's better having his ability in the ball, seeing more of the ball, which he does in that deeper role.
I think Scotland have got a very settled way of playing now, and you could see that in the England game, there wasn't necessarily in the England team a philosophy, and there didn't feel like a kind of coherence around that team. Whereas with Scotland, you felt like, yes, on paper, England have a better 11, not stratospherically better 11, but probably a better 11 than Scotland do. But Scotland are better drilled. And a guy like Mctominy, who's not playing necessarily in his natural position, knows exactly what his role is and performs it very well. And you watching that England game, you didn't at any point, for all that there's sort of the slightly patronising talk of, plucky Scotland, it was never a backs to the wall performance. There was a kind of slightly nervy moment in the box in injury time, and there was the John Stones header, but apart from that, it wasn't like they were kind of laying siege to Scotland's goal. And that comes down to players like Mctominy knowing what their job is and sticking to it and not being in any way kind of rattled.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's absolutely right, mate, if I'm honest. The one criticism I had of him in the Czech game was maybe somewhat unfairly comparing him to Darren Fletcher, not as a player, because stylistically they're very different, but obviously as the Man United player in the Scotland team, you've got to look like the Man United player in the Scotland team. And it wasn't his fault that the game bypassed him in terms of the ball going over his head, but I don't think he imposed himself as he could in that Czech game, because he's quite a tenacious, hardy player. I think he could have shown a bit more of that in the midfield, but against England, he was absolutely heroic, as were all of our players. I'm going to finish up just by asking you your favourites and your tops of certain things, mate.
Okay.
So let's start off with your top pundits, and I'll let you given the numbers of them that there are, I'll let you give a bronze, a silver, and a gold if you want.
Okay. Bronze, Souness. Silver, Alex Scott. Gold, McCoist.
Gold, McCoist. Excellent. Love it. Favourite commentary, Joe? I've got a feeling that Ali McCoist might be going kind of a bit like a heptathlete or decathlete, getting various medals here.
Oh, yeah, probably. Well, it'd have to be McCoist and Tildesley.
Yeah.
Not quite up there with McCoist and champion from the 2018 World Cup, but that was in the days of the McCoist travelogues. So a halcyon,
That was amazing. Just talking about Russian cities. Brilliant. Yeah. Let's talk about the Clive Tildesley Sam Matterface thing actually, just briefly. What's your view on that? Because I mean, they've jettisoned Clive Tildesley for a guy who tries to shoehorn the worst puns and cliched hackneyed turns of phrase, like saying that Cristiano Ronaldo has more records than HMV when HMV went bust a decade ago. It's just like, come on. Also, by the way, the worst Sam Matterface, he's kind of a bit Partridge, right? Which I'll admit I am myself, right, on occasion. But he honestly did one of the worst bits of commentary I've ever heard. And I'm no way to stick the boot in, because he's a better commentator than me, and he's achieved more and what have you, as I look to hone my craft in that particular branch of what I do. But I remember him commentating, and it was the game where Russell Martin scored at the Kop for Norwich City against Liverpool, and he made it about Bernard Matthews.
Oh, for God's sake.
And I'm just thinking, wow, that's quite something. And I don't know. I just think the decision to jettison the guy that I think's the best commentator on earth in the English language for him was complete folly.
Well, there was a review I always remember of an album, and it was the review was, people always, whenever people ask Blur or Oasis, the real answer is Pulp. So whenever people ask Matterface or Tildesley, the real answer is Drury. So
fair enough.
Yeah, but I think Sam Matterface is solid, but occasionally cheesy. I think Tildesley is a league above that. I think Tildesley he captures the passion of it, and he's had in his career iconic moments of commentary, Clive Tildesley, and you would not necessarily be able to pinpoint those with Sam Matterface. Tildesley is a good foil for Ali McCoist because they obviously have a decent rapport, and he plays to McCoist's strengths of bringing the enthusiasm, bringing the viewer along with their enthusiasm, and Tildesley does feel like a guy who gets it. I think Tildesley and McCoist are the kind of ideal partnership at this tournament.
I would certainly go with that. Right, this is a weird one to throw in, and it might not work for you. So I'm gonna try it out. So I've started this thing where I'm tweeting anytime I'm watching a game with my mum and my dad. I'm tweeting out this thing where if they say something that's really just funny and a kind of left field way, I'm calling it #Hoose Punditry. So I've got that wee thing there. Do you have any good #Hoose Punditry stories from the tournament so far? So I'll give you a couple of examples of Hoose Punditry, right? One would be when this was a collaborative effort. When my dad says that he was talking about Giorgio Chiellini in the opening game, and he says, he looks like a painter. He looks like the kind of guy you'd get into paint your wall, right? And my mom goes, aye, with a hangover. Right, so Giorgio Chiellini being a painter with a hangover, that's an example of Hoose Punditry. The Croatia boss was in his resplendent best in their opening game against England and looked roasting, right, on that Wembley touchline in that game. And my mum and this was my dad. He says so, but again, which is where he's the kind of thing here. That's a pub in the mining village of New Cumnock, and he says he looks like he's just going out to Bregenne on a Saturday. Another example of Hoose Punditry. Have you experienced any Hoose Punditry during the tournament? And anyone who's watching who has, fire them into us before we finish up.
This tournament, not so much because it's basically me and my wife in the flat, and my wife she's been working during a lot of the games. And when she's been here, I've been kind of laser focused on picking up the commentary because I basically have these columns to do. But going back a while when I was a wee boy watching France '98, I always remember the World Cup final. It's not so much something they said as something they did. But I was watching the World Cup final, and it was me sitting next to my sister, sort of perched against the bottom of the couch, and my mum and dad were on the couch. And just as the game kicked off, the final, France-Brazil, my dad just jumped over my head with no warning, just jumped over my head right up in the sky, down with a thud right in front of me. And I was like absolutely stunned. And like, why would you do that? Why did you do that? And he said, no reason, but you'll always remember me doing it. So that is primarily what everyone else remembers that World Cup final for Ronaldo being off his game and Zidane scoring a double. I remember it from my dad going flying through the air for absolutely no reason.
I'll get all the time in the world for that, mate. Couple more favourites to batter out. Favourite Scotland chant?
Well, the one that you mentioned earlier, the Rabbie Burns one, hands down.
Sorry, I'm going more for the kind of football related one, so like the kind of standard in-game chant, because we've already established that was the best social media moment, definitely. I think
we've got McGinn. Go for that. We've got McGinn, Super John McGinn.
Super John McGinn. He's Steve Clark's man, and he's better than Zidane. And then my final one is, what's been your sort of most iconic moment with any team during this Euros? And it can be related to the broadcast, it can be related to just something that happened. I'll give you mine. My favourite moment so far is still Andrea Bocelli opening it. I thought that was so emotional, man.
Yeah, actually, I think that's a high bar to clear. I think I described it in my column as it was like in terms of emotion, it was like the first 10 minutes of Up times the entirety of Coco plus the moment in Inside Out where he says "take her to the moon," plus Bambi's mum being killed or whatever. It was just absolutely tugging on the heartstrings that moment. There's been a lot with Italy. Like you just the way that they belt out the national anthem, even just the cut of Mancini's suits, absolutely tremendous. So yeah, I can't really top the Bocelli thing, but second place would be the Italy suits for me.
Aye, no, they're brilliant. Are Italy your favourite team that you've had in the tournament so far?
Yeah, actually, probably, because I don't think, although, there's certain teams like Italy where you never really write them off going into a tournament, I just seen that flashing up on the screen. More
emotional than Coco Brave.
That is, to be fair, that is definitely me stretching it, because Coco left me an absolute wreck, and I'm not ashamed to admit it.
But who actually did more for me? It's the bit with Bing. I don't want to give any spoilers in case anybody watches it, because it's a fantastic film. But the bit I mean with Bing Bong, right?
Yeah, well, that's the bit I'm talking about when he says "take her to the moon" for me. It killed me. But we'll talk Italy. Yeah, I think Italy were not as heavily fancied as they usually are going into this tournament, despite the fact that they had that brilliant record of, was it 27, 28 games or something going into the tournament unbeaten? I'm not sure. But they've really impressed so far. And even, I think they made 8 changes for that Wales game yesterday and played Wales off the park. So I think with that, I'd still say France are the favourites, which isn't exactly a bold prediction when you consider the players they've got. But I think Italy are in with a decent shout.
No, I'm wholeheartedly with you on that. I'll give you one last favourite question just to finish off, just because it's a Scotland love in. Who's your favourite player in the current Scotland vintage?
That is a good question. That's a really good question. I'll give Kieran Tierney the nod for 2 reasons. The most important one being he follows me on Twitter. So, like, there are footballers who've got me blocked, and for instance, Virgil van Dijk has got me blocked. So the world's most expensive defender at some point in his life thought, I need to block Old Firm Facts, and fair play to him for that.
I'm well jealous of that, by the way. Well, no, sorry. I always qualify the difference between jealousy and envy. Jealousy is like kind of putting negative connotation towards you for having it. I'm envious of the fact that Kieran Tierney follows you, mate.
I've never been lucky enough to speak to him, but the main reason for that is I think Tierney is an inspirational player, and for a number of reasons. But I remember very strongly in columns that I wrote at the time, and I think I said it on a podcast I was on, there was a bit of a backlash towards Tierney when he chose to leave Celtic, and there was an idea from a certain type of that kind of inverted commas, remember the 90s proper Celtic type Celtic fan of, he claims to be a proper Celtic man, but he wouldn't even stay for 10 in a row. When you think about the leaving aside the fact that 10 in a row didn't happen, you think about the variables involved in that. So a massive club like Arsenal come in for you and you're a young guy. That is an opportunity that is so rare for Scottish players. Mm-hmm. And if Tierney had gone, no, I'm a proper Celtic man, I'm staying for 10 in a row, could have broken his leg the next week. He might never then have got that move to Arsenal. So he's basically said it's very easy for a young Scottish guy to go, no, it's all about Celtic or Rangers for me, and just stay as a big fish in a small bowl here. But instead he's like, no, I'm going to take my chances. And it's in that kind of, he's more in that sort of Andy Murray frame of mind, where a lot of tennis players would have got to the stage that Andy Murray was at early in his career of being in the top, let's say, 20 players, but he wasn't really strong enough to challenge Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic on a physical level, or on a mental level, he was prone to kind of outbursts and stuff. But Andy Murray looked at the situation and thought, I'm not going to settle for that. I'm going to hire the best people around me so that mentally I can be strong enough to not let setbacks get to me in the game, and physically I can become an absolute machine. And he did that and eventually became for a period, the best tennis player in the world and held his own. And there's an element of that with Tierney, who a lot of Scottish footballers would be content to go, I reached a level where I was playing for Celtic and I was playing well for them. And, I got to, and I enjoyed that and I had a few drinks and I did whatever. And Tierney was like, nah, I'm just actually going to become better than that. I'm going to go down to the Premier League and not just be an Arsenal player, but be Arsenal's best player. Or one of Arsenal's best players. His attitude has been absolutely immense at Arsenal. He's dragged guys that look half-arsed at Arsenal at times. He's dragged them and become a fan's favourite because of his attitude. And you could see how valuable he was during that England game. It felt like, I'm not saying Tierney's absence was the only reason Scotland lost to Czech Republic. There were quite a few
reasons. It was a massive reason, and I don't think we'll win a game without him.
But you could see the difference having him in that side. He's not just in terms of ability a fantastic footballer, but he's also, I think, quite an inspirational figure. So yeah, for me, he would be my favourite player in that squad. It's
a great answer. Just a couple of quick things to pick out from it is, one, when the bid comes in and Celtic are saying we're accepting the bid, the level of control that Kieran Tierney has at that moment, right, is kind of it's reduced, because the club are saying, look, we're selling you. And for all that people talk about player power, that's still, if Celtic say that you're going, and in that situation. Also, what you've got to think of is you've got to think football's a 15-year career-ish on average, right? For these guys, sort of top level pros, whatever. That's a short window, and don't get me wrong, they get recompensed, particularly players with the likes of Arsenal in the Premier League and stuff, like they get recompensed the way that I believe like the top surgeons and folk that are saving lives should. But I would say that it's a short career, and you've got to look at it with that perspective. It's like anything else. If you can earn money from it, then earn as much money as you can, particularly if it's a shortened window. Yeah. And the third point I would just make on it is, if Kieran Tierney had stayed at Celtic, he's already got problems with injuries. I think those problems with injuries are as a result of Celtic basically playing 11 months of the year with a ridiculous European qualifying schedule. And I think having been subjected to that intensity has contributed to the fact that he's now fairly injury prone, which is the only real worry you've got about Kieran Tierney for the rest of his career, is whether he's got the durability to last, And if he'd stayed at Celtic, that would just have been exacerbated.
Yeah, I think with Tierney, is as much as Celtic are a huge club, Arsenal, that a top Premier League club, he's getting the best of everything down there. So even the best physios, the best setup to either prevent or manage injury problems for him. And as you alluded to there, the financial recompense he's getting there. I mean, he's going to be a couple of years at Arsenal. That is him not just set up for life, it's his family set up for life. And Celtic, don't get me wrong, would have been paying him well, but not Arsenal, not Premier League well. And he's basically he's now playing at a higher level. He's improving himself as a player, and he's been well rewarded into the bargain. So it was a no-brainer for me, him leaving Celtic. And you just have to not look at it as a lot of Celtic fans do and go, well, I'm a fan and I wouldn't leave Celtic. You go, put yourself in his shoes. It was a no-brainer.
It was a no-brainer. And likewise for Brendan Rodgers, but that's a different discussion for a different day, mate. I've really enjoyed speaking to you, Adam. Always do, mate. The chats are always fun and engaging and interesting. Alan Russ making just a final point there. He's saying Arsenal out of Europe should help him next season. Absolutely spot on. Although Arsenal fans probably won't like looking at that. Adam, I've got a wee ticker going along the bottom saying about where people can find you. But for anyone listening on the audio podcast, please tell us where they can find your stuff, because it's well worth engaging with.
Yeah, so you can find my Twitter account at Old Firm Facts 1. The Old Firm Facts podcast is on Apple, Spotify, and all the usual places where you'd get your streaming stuff. I've got most days, if there's a game on, if there's a game or games on during the Euros, then the next day I'm going to have a column, a TV watch column in the Record about it. Some of them are online, some of them are not, but they'll always be in the physical edition of the paper. And on the BBC Scotland website and Twitter channels and my Twitter channel, There's currently 4 monologues that I've done, and I'm just, the minute we've stopped doing this, going to look at the edit of the 5th one, which will hopefully be going up soon. So yeah, that's where to find that stuff.
Loads of good stuff there. Definitely get involved with all the stuff that Adam has going on. You can also find anyone that's new to my channel. Please, if you've enjoyed this, please do subscribe. The Tartan Daily will run daily until Scotland are out of the tournament, and then we'll probably hold a wee bit of a post-mortem. I see when. Adam is very, very rampant in the fact that he believes we're going to get to the final, and tweeted to the effect that at least Billy Gilmour's going to be back for the final. That right?
Yeah, exactly. If anything, this could be a bonus that he's going to be well rested for that game, and he's. I'm not necessarily saying that he's going to outplay Pogba, because it might not necessarily be France that we play in the final, but I think, why not be optimistic? No,
you're quite right. And all joking aside, we can go on a run if we get to the knockout stages. I do genuinely believe that, and if we could emulate, let's say, what Wales did 5 years ago, that would be absolutely phenomenal. But as I say, anyone who's new to my channel, if you've enjoyed it, please subscribe, hit the wee button and the bell on YouTube. For anyone listening to the audio podcast, if that's for the first time, then you can subscribe, or if that's how you prefer to consume your content, you can subscribe to the Tartan Daily. Just be searching in all your major podcast platforms. And thank you, everyone, for watching. I'm going to play my wee outro video, but there's one thing to remember in this tournament, and I always say this: no Scotland, no party. Thank you for watching today's Tartan Daily. I hope you enjoyed the episode. We'll be doing each of these every day during the Euros, as long as Scotland are in the tournament. Remember, you can find me. I'm Hodgeythehack. That's HODGEY, the Hack, on all social media. So that's Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. If you were watching the stream on YouTube today, then please remember to hit the bell for notifications of future streams. And if you're listening on the podcast, then you can subscribe on your major podcast players, and please give a rating or a comment saying how much you enjoyed it. And remember, if you're enjoying these podcasts, then please share them with all your friends. Thank you very much for watching or listening. And remember, no Scotland, no party.